Haere mai, ko Emma Timewell tako ingoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome everybody, I'm Emma Timewell. I am the National Co-Convener for the Association for Women in the Sciences, otherwise known as AWIS, and happy International Women's Day. So I'm hoping you can all hear me. If someone can say yes in the chat, that would be great. The chat should be down the bottom of the screen. We are very excited to bring you our first My Story session. So this is going to be a monthly webinar series. We'll run over the rest of the year. And nobody's putting anything into the messages, which is really concerning me. So I'm going to keep plowing on and hope that it's working. So last September, AWIS co-hosted the International Conference for Women Engineers and Scientists, which was a great event, but it was really quite saddening to hear that women in science all over the planet are still not being as well represented as we would like. So we took that as, oh, chat is disabled. That's why. Sorry, I'm getting text messages now. I shall turn it on. But that does mean that you can hear me, which is great. We took that as a challenge, though. We thought, right, great, we're going to do some more stuff. So this My Story webinar series is the first of our initiatives to roll out through 2024 to just allow more women to hear stories from each other. And thank you for telling me you can hear me. So we can, more women can hear stories from each other and we'll start learning from each other, and hopefully we can advance everybody together to get better representation of women. This series is all about sharing stories from women about how they have tackled their career, the barriers they've faced, and their top tips for staying in STEM and being able to advance through STEM. These webinars are not possible without the support of plant and food research. And so I have asked Mark Piper, who is the CEO of Plant and Food Research, and I know he's a boy, but can we welcome him anyway? So just say a few words about why he felt that this was a really great thing to support.
Kia ora, thanks, Emma. Kia ora koutou. So firstly, echo Emma's comments, happy International Women's Day. I personally think every day should be International Women's Day. I know that the amazing discoveries that have been made around the world wouldn't be possible without them. There's a quote I love from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who hopefully many of you know, which is that women belong in all places where decisions are being made. I actually think that quote should be a little bit longer and should say women belong in all places where decisions and discoveries are being made. Because there's such a long history, from people like Rosalind Franklin, critical to discovering the structure of DNA, Dorothy Hodgkin, who discovered the structure of insulin, later won a Nobel Prize for it, only the third woman to do so. And then people like Michelle Dickinson, Nano Girl, who I know well, and is a huge driving force for the future of people in science and into STEM in general, and is a badass scientist and engineer herself. Women have always played a huge role in scientific discovery. And I feel really privileged to work in an organisation that supports diversity into all our roles. And we continue to look for opportunities to support women in science, and being a sponsor of this is fantastic. I also feel really privileged to come to work every day and be surrounded by such talented women, all far more talented than me, who continue to advance the world for a brighter, greener future. And really looking forward to having the wonderful Dr. Gill Jolly sharing her amazing story today. So hand over. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. I think with no further ado, the chat is working. I've tested it. It's working. So if you have any questions, then please feel free to put them in the chat. You can just send the questions to the hosts and panelists, so that only us three would see them if you want to stay anonymous, or you can put the chat to everybody in the group. But I am not going to say much about Gill, because that's her job. She's going to tell us her story. So Gill, over to you.
Kia ora, and thank you, Emma, for that. Let me see if I can do the share properly. Is that all working? Looks good. Perfect. All right. Thanks. And yeah, as both Mark and Emma said, it's International Women's Day, and I didn't actually realise that until today. So I put that as a bit of a subtitle. Inspiring inclusion is the theme for this year. So it's fantastic to be talking to you on such an important day. So, okay, that started. Okay, so I'll start with my pepeha. So tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Windhill te monga, ko Derwent te awa, ko Yorkshire te iwi. No Sheffield aho, engari te whanganui a taura toko kainga inaene. He volcanologist me te Chief Science Advisor hikina whakatutuki o ko Tungamahi, ko Jill Jolly toku inua, no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. And this picture is of my monga, on top of my monga where I was earlier this year, Windhill in the Derbyshire Dales, and I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go through. So, as my monga is in the Derbyshire Dales, that probably is pretty obvious that I'm a Brit. I've been in New Zealand now since 2006. I was actually born in Sheffield in Yorkshire, so that's where my iwi is. And throughout my career, I've essentially identified myself throughout as a volcanologist, although I've done a number of other different things. I currently work at GNS Science Te Pu'ao, but I've worked in different countries around the world, and I have to say, visited quite a lot of volcanoes in different parts of the world as well, which is my passion. Since July 2023, I've been seconded to MBIE as the Chief Science Advisor. And I have to move myself out of the way because I can't see the rest of the words. But I guess in terms of what my real persona is behind all of that, I'm a mum to two fantastic kids who are 18 and 22, wife to my lovely husband. As a result of those, I'm a taxi driver a lot of the time, and probably the most needy person in the household is Millie the dog, who's up at the right-hand side there, now that the kids are full-grown adults. But I still need to do all the cooking and cleaning and so on. Other things that I really love to do, I'm eclectic music lover, read books. My kids tease me that I've got such a pile of books by the side of the bed. I'd never get through them, but I do gradually make my way through them. Another part of my kind of persona, I suppose, is that I'm a very kind of keen sports fan, and the list of teams that I support there kind of mirrors my journey through life, from the Blades, who are Sheffield United, who aren't doing particularly well in the UK Premiership at the moment, Yorkshire Cricket, through the Wellington teams, Phoenix, Hurricanes, Firebirds. My husband's from Seattle, so I'm a keen fan of the Seattle sports teams as well, and then all the New Zealand teams too at the moment. So over the next wee while, I'm going to talk about my career journey and then kind of finish up with what would I tell my younger self. So this is where my journey starts. This again is the Derbyshire Dales, and I guess my love of nature really kind of started out there. Spent Saturday afternoons with the family, my mum and dad, my brother, walking in the Peak District, understanding what the rocks were, getting fascinated by nature. So that's really where I started. And from there, I decided it would be a good thing to study science. So I then went on to Cambridge University to do my undergraduate. Some great 80s hairdos here and 80s fashion. But I think quite interesting from I guess the class photo there is that there were very few senior roles in geology at the time, and still are, but things are significantly better than they were in the mid-1980s. So there weren't many female role models, but I had some very supportive tutors, especially now Professor Steve Sparks, who was at the time a lecturer at Cambridge. So he encouraged me to do volcanology. And from there, I went on to Lancaster to do my PhD. Really, it was this was my field work. I had initially I was supposed to be going to Hawaii to do field work. More on that later. But I got the opportunity very early on in my PhD to go to Aldonia Lengai, a carbonatite weird volcano in East Africa. My two PhD supervisors were Harry Pickington and Lionel Wilson. And we went to the volcano with the two folk on the picture here, Celia Nyamweru, who was a lecturer at University of Nairobi in Kenya, and Barry Dawson, who was really the world expert on Alder Nyalengai, and also Dave Pyle, who took the photo, who at the time was a postdoc and is now a professor at Oxford. I think one of the fantastic things about my PhD was, you know, it really triggered my enthusiasm about active volcanism. Lengai was my first active volcano, still has a bit of a kind of soft spot in my heart, because just to see the forces of nature at play were just amazing. Some of the things we did on that trip I probably wouldn't do with health and safety as it is now, camping in an active crater with lots of CO2 around, but it was just an amazing experience. And I think I also discovered my kind of real enthusiasm for science and the discovery aspect of science at that point. You know, when you're doing your PhD, you start to learn new things, and you discover new aspects of science, and you suddenly realize I was the first person to notice that, and it's kind of amazing when that kind of realization hits you. During this time as well, I started to kind of understand the impact of volcanoes on science. At that point, I was very much a kind of physical scientist, a physical volcanologist. So although I was interested in that, my PhD wasn't at all focused on the impacts of volcanoes, but I began to realize that was super important. So I finished my PhD. I was looking around for what jobs I might do, and a job came up at the British Geological Survey. And the British Geological Survey at the time had a policy of what they called new blood recruits. So they looked for new PhD students or graduates, and then brought them into the organisation and put them on something completely different. So I ended up sitting in the minerals group, and I was looking for gold in Southwest Wales, base metals in the southern uplands of Scotland. So I was learning a completely new discipline, which was interesting and exciting, and some great fieldwork experiences. I also worked on some gold exploration projects across Europe. I did some geochemistry on coal burning power plants in China. So I was kind of exposed to a range of different disciplines and having to learn new areas of knowledge, which I hadn't touched on at all, either in my PhD or undergraduate studies. So that was kind of an interesting learning experience. But I started thinking, well, is this what I want to do? There were some volcanoes there. They were a little ancient though. So these are from Southwest Wales, and they're Ordovician, so probably of the order of kind of 450 million years or so old or more. But it wasn't really what was kind of driving me in terms of my science discipline. Just to comment as well about the demographics of the group that I was working in. And I think one of the reasons why the senior management put me into this group was the demographics and the hope or the idea that having a young woman in amongst a hierarchy. You can see here the front two rows are all older white males, and that was pretty much the demographic of the whole of BGS at that time. It's good to know now that things are quite different, but yeah, it's kind of symptomatic of where things were at that point in the early 1990s. So as I said, it's interesting work, great colleagues, but I was beginning to wonder whether this was where I wanted to be long term. But then serendipity happened, and on the island of Montserrat in the Eastern Caribbean, a volcano started erupting, the Soufriere Hills Volcano. Because it's an overseas territory of the UK, there was a need for British volcanologists to support the monitoring and hazard and risk assessments. So I first went out there in 1996, and I was working on and off there until 2005, including 2 stints as the director of the Volcano Observatory. This was pivotal in so many different ways for me, because it's just an amazing experience in seeing an active volcano, the impact on societies, and how that plays out in terms of people's lives and livelihoods. Probably the most important time, the most kind of maybe not important, but most pivotal time was 25th of June 1997, when there was a large eruption that killed 19 people. And really that brought home the importance and the criticality of science in decision making. And the weight of responsibility on the volcanologists was absolutely tangible. Over the following 6 months, there was the volcanic activity escalated. It wasn't clear what was going to happen next, so that sense of uncertainty, a lot of people left the island. And given that 19 people on an island of a population of 12,000, just about everybody knew somebody who'd been killed. So it had a real strong impact on the community. On a slightly happier note, second important outcome of my work on Montserrat was I met my future husband. He was out there doing a stint of science as a volcano seismologist. We met and subsequently got married in 2000. We didn't get married on a volcano, even though this photo was an early Photoshop version. This is actually the Valley of 10,000 Smokes in Alaska, where we visited in 1999. It was where his field area was for his PhD. Amazing experience to go out there, but I wasn't wearing a wedding dress, needless to say. A couple of comments really about the work on Montserrat. I was absolutely fortunate to work with some fantastic people, passionate about the science, passionate about service in support of the island. And one thing that I really enjoyed there was nurturing the capability. The chap on the right-hand side of this photo here, Graham Ryan, he's now the MVO director. So he was a A-level student, a kind of a high school student at the start of the eruption. He went away, did both a bachelor's and a PhD, came back and is now leading the science there, which is fantastic to see. During this time, I also managed to have a daughter, or we managed to have a daughter. So that's Emma there when she was about 2. She had a great experience as well, living on a small Caribbean island as a little kid. And so on to my next stop. So I was, by the end of my time in Montserrat in 2005, I was pregnant with our second child, and my husband had got a job in Hawaii. So we had some decisions to make. It was kind of the classic two-body person, two-body problem for professional couples. I had a stable job in the UK. I could have gone back to BGS, probably wouldn't have been doing volcanology. So perhaps not the direction that I wanted, but Art wouldn't have had a job. Art had a great job in Hawaii, and in fact, he had an option of 2 jobs, but there was no job for me. So we were trying to trade off between those 2 options, and then we were really lucky to get offers of 2 jobs down in New Zealand. So that we had a third option, which was to move to New Zealand. We'd never been to New Zealand. We didn't even come down for a job interview. So probably as long as far away as you can get from support networks for me, for my family. And we didn't know anybody here, but we, as scientists do, we did a spreadsheet and looked at the happiness index of each of us, including the kids, and decided that New Zealand was the place for us to go. So following the next kind of nine years, I was involved in the volcanology department. I was the head of the volcanology department for a while. And we went through various different eruptions of Ruapehu, Tamari on Tongariro, Whakaari, unrest at Taupō as well. And again, this kind of brought home to me towards the end of that period, obviously 2019 was when Whakaari erupted, and we've seen the sentencing and the court case come to a conclusion at the end of last week. But that really, both Montserrat and Whakaari shows why science is so critical. This is actually a picture of Nico Fournier and Rich Johnson talking to the iwi, senior iwi leaders on Tamari, and it also gave me a new perspective on Mātauranga and Tikanga, and there's a whole other story there that I can share at some point about the importance of that engagement and that shared understanding. A great episode during this period as well was going out to Vanuatu in 2009, 2010. I was asked to do a strategic plan for the Vanuatu Geohazards Management Department. And that was fantastic to build that capability. I supported them through a response together with other people in the volcanology department to Goward Volcano, which is the volcano on the left. And just to see how inspiring people like Esleen Garabiti, who was at that point the head of the Vanuatu Geohazards department, how she was inspiring her staff with relatively little resource to do the best work they could for their country in monitoring all those geohazards. So finally, to Wellington next. Well, in terms of geographic move, the latest geographic move, which was in 2015, I became the first female science executive at GNS when I went into a Tier 2 position as the Natural Hazards Risk Division Director. Through that period, I led the division through a number of different responses, most notably the Kaikoura earthquake in 2016. I was in various different roles, but one of the things here was GNS went through a series, or kind of a set of restructuring processes, and I think I went through about 4 or 5 different roles in the space of 2 years. So I was kind of chopping and changing, and at times I thought, oh, maybe I don't have a job when the restructure comes to a conclusion. It was quite a stressful time, coupled with the various different responses that we were having to deal with, where we were getting fairly serious pressure from the kind of political environment, from officials to provide advice in a timely fashion, and from senior management within GNS. And for some time, I was so-called single point of failure. I was one of the only people who could provide a certain level of advice within GNS and out to stakeholders. So various points during those few years, I was probably not in a fantastic space. I would say that what grounded me was my family, knowing that I could get up onto the hills in Wellington. This is from the Skyline Walkway above Karori, and the fantastic support of colleagues. So they were super supportive. They were there when you needed it. And I think one thing I would kind of pass on to people, it's okay to ask for help if you're in a really tricky space like that. But overall, that's really helped build my personal resilience. There's no volcanoes there, though. That was kind of the downside. And then finally, my most recent career step has been from GNS as a science leader into MB as the chief science advisor, and I've been in that role since July of last year. An interesting point here, maybe for people to take up on, is it's my 3rd try at getting a role in MB as a science advisor. So I think a key kind of learning there is persistence pays. So if you're really passionate about a job, keep trying. One of the kind of the bullet points was what does a typical day look like in your current role? And I thought, oh gosh, how do I explain that? And I think the first thing, there is no such thing as a typical day in a chief science advisor role. So I just went through the last week in my calendar and I thought, well, what have I done? And how can I explain that? Key thing is there's lots of meetings, lots of engaging with different people. So I met with the Deputy Secretary, my boss, Nick Blakely, about a presentation I'm giving next week to the MB senior leadership team on the use of science advice. I met with a science sector person and senior officials in MB about Horizon Europe. I had various catch-ups with my team, so those departmental science advisors, David Hutchinson, Emily Parker, Louise Parr-Brownlee, senior policy advisor Ashok Parbu, and executive officer Dina Cookson. So catching up with them, seeing what they're up to, kind of doing a little bit of kind of management, but at the same time, just really interested in the work that they're doing. Meeting with other MB teams. So MB's a huge beast. So the building systems, electricity markets and generation, chief economist, so many different parts of MB that you kind of, you don't realize are there until you kind of start seeking them out. Spent a bit of time talking to other scientists in the sector, so you hear what they're thinking and hearing. That's super important in my role to understand what the science sector's doing and feeling. Working with the senior leadership team of the Science Innovation Technology part of MB to discuss science policy. Workshop on a future funding process with the science investments people. I met with various people from Canada and Italy around a workshop at Understanding Risk Conference in Japan, and a meeting with people from the UK Department of Science and Innovation and Technology, and an evening reception hosted by the British High Commissioner. So it's maybe not totally a typical week. It was pretty busy this week, but those are the kinds of things that I get involved with. But ultimately, connecting to the science sector, connecting within MB, connecting across government, both nationally and internationally, is probably the key parts of what I do now. So a couple more slides. Some things that I've learned along the way. I think I touched on it with the Chief Science Advisor role. Put yourself forward for opportunities, believe in yourself. If you really want to do something, then go for it. A couple of times I've thought, often I think the literature says women often don't put themselves forward until they're ready. So I've done that in the past. More recently, I'll just put myself forward. And if you don't get the role, then what do you learn from that? Can you get feedback about what you could do better next time? Really important in providing science advice is that everybody's human. People have got all sorts of things going on in their lives, so be empathetic and seek to understand their position. You might perceive that they're reacting badly, but there's invariably something behind that. So be easy on yourself as well. You can't do everything, and I have to keep telling myself that I can't do everything. What do I need to prioritize? One thing I've done recently, probably in the last couple of years, is take time to reflect on a regular basis. I now have breakfast with myself once a week, and I look back over the week and think, well, what have I done? And what do I need to do next? And I think an important part of that is celebrate your successes. So even if it's just a little thing, have yourself a cup of coffee and go, yeah, actually, I did a good job there. And if you didn't do such a good job, then yeah, what can you learn from that, and how can you move on? So what would I tell my younger self? Well, I think be authentic, true to your values, and honest, both with yourself and with other people. Respect is super important. Respect yourself, other people, and other cultures, and be curious. So never stop learning. I've got a little book here, which can't see that very well, but each week I sit down and go, what have I learned this week? What have I learned about myself? What have I learned about other people? What have I learned about science? And that's really quite illuminating to kind of keep filling that every week. And you think, wow, over the last 6 months, what have I learned? That's amazing. And above all, look after yourself. And there's just a couple of photos there. Me and my best friend, it's sometime in the 1980s with some classic 1980s hairdos. And on the right, Ali was over in New Zealand last year. She's a consultant gynecologist at Cambridge Cambridge Hospital. So, she's made a fantastic career. And it was just amazing to catch up. And it was like we'd never, the 50 years between, maybe not 50 years, 40 years between those two pictures. It's like it was 5 minutes. And above all, have fun. And I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. The chat is quiet, which is, oh, there we go. There's a question. Did you have any mentors along the way? And if so, what is the best piece of advice you were ever given?
Ooh,
and
gosh.
what was the worst?
A couple of times I've had official mentors, people that I've had through kind of an HR process, but probably the unofficial mentors have been the more important. I would point to Steve Sparks as somebody who's been there throughout my career, is always there to kind of exchange emails with. So he's just an amazing person, inspiring. He inspired me to get into volcanology in the first place because of his just total enthusiasm about the subject. So worst piece of advice. So I had a performance review probably 2 years into my role at BGS, and the kind of senior manager there, not my direct line manager, but my senior manager said, you need to be more aggressive. And I thought, I'm not an aggressive person. What they meant, I think, was you need to be more assertive. And I think they have fair comment there. That's something, as an introvert, that's something that I need to be constantly working on. But I really reacted badly to the be aggressive. So I wrote a comment back in my performance management. I don't think I need to be aggressive. I don't think that's a good idea. Probably didn't help my career at that point with my senior manager, but I felt like that true to your values, I felt like I had to make a statement. So best piece of advice: look after yourself. I think. I know, I've had a couple of colleagues who've been really super supportive within GNS, particularly when times have been tough, and they've just said, go home. You're not helping anybody by being in the office at this point. So go home, relax, and take time out. That's okay. So yeah, that's probably the best piece of advice.
It's interesting because most people don't like aggressive women. That's what we're told all the time, right?
Yes, yeah, that's
to
right.
be told to be more aggressive seems counterintuitive.
Yes.
So where have your science skills and training helped you in a more executive or governance type roles?
I think probably I don't know about my science skills per se, but more my people skills. So through various different roles, doing science, learning how to collaborate, kind of listen to people's different viewpoints and so on. Although that's more of a soft skill around science, but you need those soft skills to be able to do science effectively. So when you're going into a kind of either a governance or a senior leadership roles, that's so important. You don't have all the answers. You need to understand what other people's perspectives are, listen to those, and ultimately, if you're in a decision-making role, you need to be able to make decisions, but you need to weigh up the different evidence from different parts, and get a balanced view.
Sounds like spreadsheets as well are very important in your life.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, actually talking about spreadsheets, could you expand on your use of the happiness index? I think you said you used a happiness index to decide whether to move to New Zealand. So
yeah,
what did that look like?
Oh yeah. So it was, we've used it more recently as well, because my husband has now gone back to work in Hawaii, so we use the same kind of process. Very qualitative. So you'd have the different members of the family, which in some of our early decision making, it was just me and Art and the dog. There's another dog, not Millie. Then, you know, as the kids came on board, it was what's more important for them. And then we'd look at things like career development, education for the kids, where would they, you know, traveling, for example, support networks. And then you'd kind of score them, I don't know, 1 to 5, and then look at overall. It's a qualitative matrix. Not terribly scientific, but kind of maybe a step up from going wet finger in the air.
I love the fact that the dog got a column.
Yes, oh, absolutely. And no, a cat as well. There was a cat at one point.
So this is, and there's probably not much you can say that's not public knowledge, but it will be interesting to hear. Are you involved in Te Ara Pairangi? If so, what's your role with that, or what was your role with that, I guess? And
Yep.
Are there any updates?
Yes, good. I think I can say some things. Probably can't say too much, but so it's probably fair to say both me and Emily Parker and Louise Parr Brownlee, who joined around about the same time in kind of middle of last year, when we went through our interviews, one of the questions was, why do you want to come and work at MB? And I certainly said, and I'm pretty sure the other two would have said somewhere in their list of why, is we want to work on Te Ara Pairangi, because we see that this is a really important time for the science system. So it was challenging, because we all joined at a time when Te Ara Pairangi was in full flight. So things like the discussions on the national research priorities were midstream. So you're trying to build those relationships with the people within MB, who some of whom we knew already, but others we didn't know at all. So you're kind of trying to build that level of trust and confidence, that we had something of value to support the work, at the same time as the work was kind of going full steam ahead. So we were involved in conversations about national research priorities, linking with the other chief science advisors, including Juliet Gerard as the Prime Minister's chief science advisor, engaging around the sector. So that's one particular part, but there's obviously several other work streams underway. Louise, as she whakapapas Te Māori, already had a strong relationship with Willie John Martin, who leads the policy work on Te Tiriti. Got him alongside Willie and was supporting him. And various other things like the fellowships and the applied doctorate scheme. So our role is kind of bring the science sector voice into MB. So, you know, if we're going to do some new fellowships, how would that land with the sector? What would that look like if we did the applications in this way or that way? So we want one kind of voice to provide into the policy people to support the work. We're not leading per se, but we're supporting with the kind of the knowledge that we have about the science sector. So what was the second part of the question?
Any updates?
Any updates? So I think you'll have seen probably in the last couple of weeks that the minister, the new minister, has basically said that program is finished. So Te Ara Pairangi as a thing no longer exists. However, the evidence base is still there, that there are parts that the science system needs to evolve and change. And so the current minister is thinking about how best to do that. It was a very ambitious and broad program, so there's specific things within the areas that we need to change that that she can focus on and get the policy people to focus on to look at. So probably the update is she's currently considering her priorities and how those might play out. There's a couple of things that she's clearly signaled that are really important to her, like the gene tech biotech regulation. So that's underway. So I don't think that's a big secret, but so that's a big piece of policy work that's underway. But other things are still yet to have that real clarity about what's going to happen next.
I think it's probably reassuring for everybody that the work that went into Te Arapaerangi has not been thrown out, if that makes sense. There's
that's
quite
right.
a lot of learnings.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the input that went into the green paper from the sector, there's a fantastic evidence base there that you can't ignore. And I think an important thing about science advice in general into policy is that you build the evidence base, and then there's that set of knowledge is there for them to pull on when they're developing new policy.
Pivot in a different direction. I'm literally just going through the questions top to bottom. So do you miss the practical science and your volcanoes? And how do you fill your cup in that space?
Oh, yeah, great question. Yes, I have to say I do miss the practical side. I do miss the volcanoes. If you were to talk to my kids, they would kind of you could see their eyebrows going to the ceiling, like, oh God, Mum, if we're driving around South Island, and I'm getting really excited about not necessarily volcanoes in South Island, but about the geology, and looking at my app on the phone and saying, oh, we're on such and such a schist or whatever. So they get a bit tired of my geology enthusiasm. So that's one way of filling my cup. I obviously like to still kind of tune in to science talks. I've had some fantastic experiences over the last 6 months going out into the science sector and hearing what people are doing. It's just amazing stuff. I thought I knew a lot about the science sector. I probably know about this much, and there's so much more to learn. And it's great to get that directly from particularly early career researchers, so that enthusiasm and that kind of sense of discovery. So I get a real buzz out of that and seeing what people are doing.
Do you like to climb up a volcano when you're on holiday? Just to
Yeah,
feel them under your feet?
Yeah, that's right. Just a little bit.
So another question, bouncing around all over the place, which is fantastic. What are your thoughts on the role of allies who are men for women in science?
That's a good question. That sounds like a politician, doesn't it? That's what they always say when they're trying to think of an answer. I think, I mean, it's about teamwork, isn't it? I mean, there's no point saying it's all about women when the men like Mark are so kind of supportive of women in science. I think it's fantastic that you have people that are real proponents for women in science who are male, because we can't do it alone. It's got to be a team effort.
And can you tell us about your experience? What about your experience is helping you navigate the uncertainty in the sector, particularly post-election?
Yeah, no, that's a good question too. I think there's a you have to have always have to have that sense of optimism. When I went through that period in kind of, I guess, 2017 to 2018, 2019, when I jumped around between different roles, I didn't know what my role would be. I didn't even know if there would be a role for me in GNS at the end of the different restructures. Things tend to kind of work out, and you can make your own opportunities. So I have this kind of I'm more glass half full than glass empty. There's always going to be opportunities. There's risks as well, but you can always look for new things and new ways of doing things. Even at the time when I was in BGS and I was beginning to wonder whether I wanted to stay in a career of geosciences at all, I started looking at, I did a lot of sport at that time, and I looked at going into sports science and kind of more sporting kind of career paths. So those avenues can open up. Take the opportunities when they come up. Navigating the uncertainty at the moment, yeah, it's a pretty tough time, not just across the science sector, but across all of government. The fiscal constraints are very real. The people within MB, they're being asked to reduce expenditure by 7.5%, and that's across all of MB. And that's across all of government, and people are really working hard to maintain the level of expenditure into the science sector. But it's tough. It's tough on people. But try and keep that kind of sense of optimism and look for the opportunities when they arise and seize them.
Yep. Speaking of which, the next question, quite aptly, some of these questions have come in a great order. Where next? Where will you head after this role? What would you be looking for in the future?
No. I haven't done much thinking about that, to be honest. I mean, an obvious next step would be the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor role, if that's something that I wanted to do. I'm enjoying my MB role at the moment. Maybe after a few years in this role, though, I've had enough of government. I don't know. I'm still very much kind of the early learning and thinking about how I can make the most impact in this role. It would be nice to go back into science and do some kind of volcanology again. That would be fantastic. And there's some areas there that I'm really passionate about, and that's around the communicating science and the risk assessment. So I do still have 1 day a week at GNS, and I'm trying to use that day in a way that I can build out my networks in my science, or rebuild my networks in the science areas, as well as supporting the work, that the really important work that GNS has to do. So yeah, I've got another 18 months in this role. I haven't kind of turned my head too much into the kind of what next. So we'll see.
That's all the questions in the chat. I had a question. If you had to give young women in science one reason for getting in or staying in science, what would it be?
I think it's an area of work where you can make a real tangible difference. You can, in just about every science, you can say that this is going to make a difference to this part of society. Volcanology has been particularly acute, and the work that I've done has been particularly close to kind of society and communities at large. But you can see, if you look back over, I don't know, the last 20 or 30 years, you can see where the real advances in society have been made through science and innovation and new technology. And I think seeing that, being able to kind of do that discovery, see it kind of applied, and then make a difference to communities, to people, to the economy, is hugely rewarding. And so, yeah, I guess that's, if you want to make an impact on society, science is a really important way of doing that.
think that's a great place to end. So thank you so much. That was really interesting and a very different take on science from, I think, what most of us are used to. A lot of us don't really think of volcanoes as science. So it's always good to hear from somebody who works in a slightly different area to what your brain usually sits in. So thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. Mark, thank you too for being here, being the boy in the room. Not sure if you're the only one, you may be. So we're going to be doing these seminars every month and around about the same time of the month, but we're going to change the day around because we know that everybody tends to have standard meetings one day a week. So we'd like everyone to have a chance to come. Next month, we are going to hear from Professor Rosalind Archer, who is the Dean Academic of Griffith Sciences at Griffith University in Queensland, but she is a Kiwi, so she fits here, and she's actually an engineer. So something very different from volcanology. That's going to be at 12 o'clock on the 9th of April, which is a Tuesday. If you heard about this seminar from a friend, please sign up on our website to make sure you get all the details for the next seminar, and please share with your friends and get them along to the next one. The recording of this session will be available on the AWIS website over the next couple of days. So again, share that, and we will hopefully see you next month. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Mark. Thank you all for coming. Ka kite.